Hi there, Covalence students and people who happen to stumble upon this video from YouTube. This is a assisting video meant for those that are going through part of our back-end course in our Catalyst program. If you have interest in joining our course or getting access to our courses, you can do so with a link in the description found down below. For $25 a month, you get access to our front-end and back-end courses that combine make our full-stack program, as well as my standalone React course. And any other course we add in the future, you automatically get in there, as well as Discord access, our AI lab reviews, and all that kind of fun stuff that we have. For questions or comments and things like that, or anything you have interest in, just check the description down below for that link and continue on. Otherwise, this is going to be a free little mini course on YouTube here that's going to be an assist for students that have some difficulty grasping what you can build or do with server-side development. And when you teach enough theory and concepts about it, that is enough for some students to get and pick up and run with. Others just need something kind of more hands-on to get underway. So we're going to be doing and using all the tools that our students in this part of the course already have. So if you're coming here from YouTube, you should be familiar with a code editor. I'll be using VS Code. This is not a full IDE, as people online argue about all day, which is not. It's just a code editor. You can use Notepad++. Heck, you can just use regular Notepad. I don't really care if that's your thing. But again, if you want to follow along with me in this video, I'll be using VS Code. I'll be using a Bash terminal, which if you're on Mac, you have access to a terminal automatically. All you have to do is go and find it in the applications and use it. I'll be using one for Windows called Commander, which is CMDER. If you want to use Windows Subsystem for Linux or WSL or WSL2 and things like that, you can get away with those as well. I'll also be using Node in this project. Surprise, surprise. So make sure you have Node installed on your computer. It's as simple as going to Node.js.org. Yeah, Node.js.org and downloading the long-term stable version, aka LTS. I'm on 18.16 and it's currently on 2010, so you can actually get some newer features and quality of life and more efficient optimized code by downloading the latest version. It used to be that major Node releases would have massive differences between them, but these days it's not that big a deal, thankfully. So even though I'm on 18 and you user that is trying to follow along might be on 20 or higher, just make sure you have it installed because we're going to be using it here. I have this written as Markdown that I'll be copying and pasting into a README file into a repository that you are able to clone and go along with, or you can even look at it and look through the branches of the various stages as I complete this tutorial. It should just be 2 videos long. This video will cover just about everything on the back end, and the next video we're going to cover tying it to the front end, and from there just kind of add some small quality of life features and go from there. So the purpose of this is to build a simple Express.js server that interacts with a front end, allowing users to level up a character because the students Baldur's Gate 3 is pretty popular right now. I've been playing it a lot. A lot of my students seem to be playing it, and a lot of us are D&D dorks as well. So I figured a little D&D style application theme will be fun to have here. We're basically going to be having a drop down that allows us to select classes and level them up to a maximum of 12, which is where Baldur's Gate story ends, and a lot of D&D games happen to end as well. It's going to demonstrate fundamental concepts of web development, server-side processing, which is the star of the video, and client-server interaction, which is understanding how these two things communicate, which is where a lot of it is lost. So this may be a full mystery, and then because of that, the client-server interaction tends to get lost a lot as well. So we're going to learn a lot about Express.js basics. We're going to learn how to install and set up a basic Express server and add some routes to it and talk about what those are. Because we're not going to be using a database of any kind, and rather than doing any kind of in-memory variable, I'm going to choose to try and do this from a JSON file. Now, students that are in our back-end course have learned about the basics of path and file system. I'll try and cover them, but they won't be nearly as in-depth as what they are already in our course. There's tons of videos online that show you them, but I'll give you some basic, file operation stuff to get us going, and it's going to act as our database for this particular project. Now, we are going to be kind of building a REST API, but not really. REST stands for Representational State Transfer. And I tell my students that means it's basically a set of guidelines or principles that us as developers, of server-side developers rather, should try and follow so other developers know and can help what we're doing. You don't necessarily have to follow all of its guidelines. And you'll see that even in this project and a lot of my personal projects, I understand what REST is and I tend to break its protocols for quality of life or convenience. Meaning, instead of having two separate endpoints that do two separate or and related actions like you probably should, I sometimes may combine them into one endpoint and just do some kind of conditions inside of one singular endpoint to handle the dynamic things rather than two endpoints. It really is up to you. It doesn't matter. All production level projects are basically hobbled together with band-aids and barely running, and somehow they get the job done, and that's the most important part at the end of the day. This will also teach, hopefully, the fundamentals of front-end and back-end communication. We're going to learn how to send data from a website to a server, have it stored on the server, and sent back to the website as needed for display and things like that. It'll help us also show how to make dynamic content on the client side, so rather than relying on templated pages or things like that, this is where we're going to kind of do some stuff that's going to be fun, where it's going to be dynamically displaying the content, meaning as we level our character, it should be showing it. And I'll show you all a couple different ways to do it. I might actually even tackle two separate ways of submitting the form. Once via default HTML web page behavior. When you submit a form, it can contact a server with a method and action attributes on your form element. And I guess we can also remove that and do it more programmatically, which would be closer to what you'll see in frameworks like React and things like that. It'll be similar, but at least we'll understand how to do it programmatically, and it'll actually give us a lot more control over that dynamic aspect. We'll do some very minor data validation. I like to include data validation as it's a nice little next step that can take what y'all might be writing as beginners and cranking it up to the next step. I'll be using Bootstrap for styling because I already know all these class names by heart. This is not going to be, I say this every time, this is not going to be any kind of large, crazy website or web app of any kind. It needs to be simple, and I don't want it to look like raw HTML, so I'll add just enough Bootstrap to make it look decently pretty and even maybe decently mobile responsive. And we're going to talk about some basics of error handling and techniques and things like that. It won't be very production level or robust, but we will talk about the basics of them to make sure you understand where we can apply them and how to help you debug your project. Now, you don't have to follow my project structure, and this repo, as I have right now, I'll have this repository also linked in the description down below. As you can see, I haven't even initialized or committed anything yet. I'm going to be taking what we see here in this dumb little markdown sheet I've written as the README for this project, and I will add it here, and you can clone it to get started, and you'll have the README, and you can try and follow along with this tutorial. So if you need to pause and clone the project in the description down below, go for it. Otherwise, feel free to just make it on your own machine locally and not bother with that, and you just go copy and paste as necessary. And I'm probably going to be using separate branches, so you'll see a drop down for branches for starter and finish video 1, finish video 2, or something like that. These branches will indicate where I am at the end of this first and the next video in this little mini series I'm making. So the repository, this is the folder, the top level folder, the project folder, Express character level up. It's as simple as it needs to be. You can call it whatever you want. Node modules you'll be making on your own computer by running in a command called npm install. It'll install all necessary packages that it will read from these two files, which will be generated here automatically in just a moment, or if you happen to clone the project, they'll be in there already. Git ignore is why I said node modules are going to be built on your computers, because in git ignore, we're going to tell it to ignore node modules when pushing to GitHub. We don't want it to do that. So basically, these serve as your instruction manual to how to build node_modules. That way we can collaborate on the same project together and to our best ability install the same packages and their versions on our respective machines as we work on this to make sure we can very closely emulate each other's development environments without having to push node modules to GitHub, which is a huge waste of space, bandwidth, all that stuff. Node modules is a gigantic mess, and versioning differences make it a nightmare to push and pull from GitHub between teams, which is why we typically rely on these two pieces of our instruction manual instead to do so. README, that's pretty straightforward. That's what we're looking at right here, as well as whatever I end up adding to it. Now, the actual project structure will be fairly straightforward. Our public folder will be what our server sends as static assets, meaning when requested to our server, hey server, send me the website, the server should respond with the website, which will be housed in a public folder. You could just as easily call this folder pizza. I don't really care, but public is a common name for it. It'll have a JavaScript file where we're going to be doing some getting and displaying of information, a style sheet file in case I have to do any kind of custom styling for this application. I really shouldn't go that far, but you never know. And I'll have an index HTML that will have the bare bones structure of our project and some Bootstrap styling to make a form and table appear that we can display some information in. It will be very straightforward. So yeah, the server. This doesn't need to be extraordinarily complex either. I'm putting in a data folder here. I don't have to do that, but I'm kind of, I'm doing that to practice some file system stuff a little bit further. And then we have this character JSON file that we're going to write some code that if it doesn't exist, it will be created for us and initialized with a value. If it exists and has no content in it, I'll make sure it's initialized with an appropriate value. Otherwise, this character JSON is going to act as our database for this project where we're going to be reading and writing stuff to it. Character service, this is going to be a set of utility functions we're going to write together. That's where the majority of our pathing and file systeming, that's a word, that's a verbing, right? That's a verbing, is going to exist where we're going to write some utility functions to check for the existence of our character JSON file and populating it with data if it's empty or it's not there. And then the character service will also be helping us read the file's contents and write to the file's content as it is needed. And then the server.js is where our Express application is going to be created. It's going to be running and listening to on a specific port. And we're going to be writing our middlewares, and we're going to have 2 API endpoints that are going to get this whole thing done. API stands for Action Programmable Interface, a set of methods meant to interact with something. For example, if you know anything basic about JavaScript DOM, or Document Object Manipulation, the document, aka an HTML page, has a set of methods to create and manipulate elements. Get element by ID, get elements by class name, query selector, all, create element, etc. That is an API, a set of methods to interact with something. So our server is going to have 2 ways of interacting with it: a method or a get request to a path, let's say /character, that will get the character information. That just kind of reads logically, and it's something you should take into consideration when building out your APIs. That kind of just does it read logically. Get character, that makes sense. Post, level up. Someone levels up, that's a post request, meaning I want to add to or create some kind of resource, and that's what we're going to be doing there. Now, you could argue that if the resource is already created, we could consider that a replacement, put, or an update, a patch. We're going to call it posting. We're going to keep it simple with get and post only. Getting is for retrieving, posting is for adding, and that's how we're going to rock it right there. So yeah, that's going to be the general structure of this project. You are welcome to break this as you see fit, but if you're newer here, whether you're on YouTube or Covalence, you just want to follow along, I get it. Some individuals got to follow along the first time, then they can write it on their own second time. If you want to take what we're writing here and theme it to your own desire, then go for it, but there'll be some specific parts for the D&D character bit that I have to go with. But yeah, that's going to be the general project structure. So if you want to get started with this, you're going to clone the repository by running this command, git clone and the repository name. You're going to cd into it. I don't know if I'll have anything installed right away, but you'll have to run npm install if you're going to be running the final branch version of this. And you can run npm start or npm run dev, and then just open localhost 3000 to see your project. So I should add there should be a dev script here too, now that I think about it. And yeah, the purpose of this is going to be a form on the front end that will select a class and level up your character. Character's progression will be displayed in a table format showing the level and class chosen. And the server is going to ensure that no more than 12 levels can be added to a character, and that gives us some more validation we can throw on the server. Because I feel like I want to make these server API routes a little bit more robust and show some edge cases and things like that. Because again, this is going to be showing what you can do on a server, how to build one, and how it's going to help you. Not so much how do I make it work with the website I'm trying to build. We're going to focus on the server first. So yeah, that is my lovely markdown here. I think I used Dillinger.io. I like how I call it finalexam.md. I realized that I've used this website a long time ago, and I didn't realize it was for writing the final exam markdown for our courses. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to make a new project, and like I said, we're going to call it Express. I like how I already forgot it. Oh my goodness, Luke. That is embarrassing. Express character level up. I knew that. Who said I didn't? Character level up. I was just testing y'all. Get in the comments if you facepalm when I immediately forgot what my own project was going to be called here. So Express character level up. There is the directory made. Beautiful. We're going to cd into that directory now. And what I'm going to do is turn this into a Node project by writing the following command, npm init-y, that will go ahead and auto-generate our package JSON, which is our what's it called? The telling the project, our computer, this is a Node project. We're going to have access to things like path and fs and other packages like that are built into Node. The package JSON is going to be a bunch of metadata about the project that you can feel free to fill out to make it seem more professional, and I advise you do for any kind of side projects that you want to make portfolio facing, for example, and recruiters and other interviewers may be taking a look at it. But for now, I'm going to fill it out with default values, and the -y flag helps me do that, as we can see. There we go. So now that this is a Node project, let's go ahead and open up my code editor and begin building this out. Now I can go ahead and build it all out from the command line, but I'll choose to just do it via point and click this go around, even though normally I'll do like touch and make directory commands. So in our get ignore, we can't forget this. Let's go ahead and add our node modules file in there. There we go. I told y'all that we're going to have a public folder for our website stuff and a server folder for our server side stuff. In our public folder, we're going to have 3 files, our index.html, a style CSS if it's needed, and a simple app.js to get our JavaScript code going. I'll go ahead and add a console log here. Hello from JS, just to know that it's going to be linked correctly here. And this is just like little minor tests. Again, I'm trying to keep in mind that people watching this video, maybe you learned to code 2 months ago, like some of our students, and you had no idea what it was before then. Maybe you're coming here from YouTube where you've been watching tutorials and you want something that covers the fundamentals and you already know some more advanced stuff here and you're not worried about this. Even to this day, I still do dumb small things like this, even though I've been coding for 7 years now, that I still do little prompts like this when building out a new project or something that just let me know I've correctly linked things together, if that's all it is. We're going to go ahead and add like a background color so I know my CSS is fixed onto the page correctly. We'll do Covalence Blue, which is the hex 0091EA. I'll use the emit command shortcut here in VS Code. So if you're watching this video not from our course and you're just a YouTuber checking this stuff out, these emit shortcuts are so nice for building out quick HTML snippets. For example, quickly building out a competent and solid HTML structure right here. So I'll go ahead and say D&D Character Planner is the title of this website. I'm going to go ahead and link my personal CSS right there. I'm going to go ahead and also link my app.js. We're going to put in an H1 that simply says, hello world, like that, and we're going to go make sure that everything is linked up correctly. I have an extension in my VS Code that gives me the ability to right-click an index, or rather any HTML file, and have the option to open it in your default browser. It's called Open in Browser. If you don't have this, just find it in your File Explorer or your Finder windows and open it and confirm. Again, pausing as needed in the video here. My CSS is pretty obvious. My JS is linked. We're all good to go. I didn't make any kind of small dumb mistake right here. Just to save myself some time, I'm going to go ahead and you don't have this obviously, so I'm going to go ahead and move my README into a README file. New file, readme.md, paste. You can also, like I said, just grab this from the GitHub repo in the description down below and copy and paste the README so you have a similar one. Add to it with your own thoughts and things like that if you want to make this like something you show off to your friends or something like that. So, cool. Style, app, index are all good to go, so I'm going to collapse that. I think that's going to be the focus of the next video. In this first part, like I said, we're going to be focusing on actually building out our server. So I'm going to make that data folder in the server file. I'm also going to, or server directory. I'm going to make a server.js file. I'm also going to make that character service.js file. Now we could also make like a services folder and put characters.js inside of it. We're going to keep it simple here and just have the singular file act as our character service that we're going to be importing and using inside of our server itself. So this whole thing is going to be built on the backbone of Express. So what we're going to be doing is installing and using Express here in our server.js file. So if we look on our package JSON, we have a singular test script and no dependencies or development dependencies. So let's go ahead and install our first one, which is what you would do with npm install from the README, by the way. When it says npm install, this would look into the package JSON and package lock JSON to install the necessary dependencies to work with this project. But since we have none right now, it won't do you any good. It'll install nothing. So what I'll be doing is installing, or we can shorthand it down to npm I instead of npm install, where I can do npm install express. This will install the Express library, which is going to be a quick way or quicker way of building out a REST API or an API or a web server. Let's keep it simple. It can be building out a web server. So it's going to be kind of like building something out using a native module in Node. For example, the HTTP module is a way of also building a web server that's just built directly into Node without me having to install anything, right? So I can get the whole thing done just like this. Okay, so that means that Express kind of takes and builds itself upon this and gives me a whole lot of little quality of life things out of the box, some plug and play capability, and a whole lot of additional third-party modules I can add to my Express server or my HTTP web server to quickly build it up. So we can build it all by hand, which I consider doing this for this video, but I do think it's nice to learn Express, even though if I'm going to be building my own projects, I don't use Express as much anymore. I tend to use other things like Feathers.js or Nest.js. They are other like kind of bootstrapped frameworks that give you a quick REST API with CRUD operations and middlewares and authentication authorization out of the box. And then for anything raw query-wise, I just write myself after that. So think of that as a more advanced, crazier, quick setup of Express. Express is fairly bare bones, and HTTP is like, I'm writing it from scratch. So I think it's worthwhile to know how to do some of the basics from HTTP. I think it's worthwhile to know how to write things from Express. And I think it's worthwhile to know how to use Feathers and Nest and things like that to build out those APIs even quicker with a lot of stuff out of the box. So we're kind of taking the middle approach here by going with Express. So we can use the Express library by importing it in here. I don't know if version 20 has import statements at the top level allowed yet or outside of module files. I'm going to assume not, so we're going to also kind of keep this old school. If you have JS files, you don't want to switch to MJS or module.js files and worry about imports or exports, which we have access to with TypeScript as well. We're going to keep it simple here and just stick to requires. This will be something you see across tutorials and YouTube videos and Medium articles and LinkedIn blog posts, all this stuff that, well, from here to high heaven, you're going to see require statements from now until every tutorial before this. So keep in mind, that's going to be more old school eventually, maybe. All right, so to make a new Express app, we're going to call a variable called app. We could just as easily call this pizza. It doesn't really matter, but all we have to do is take this import or require we have from Express that we happen to put into a variable called Express as well. We're going to invoke that Express as a function, and it returns to us a fully configured HTTP web server application with the ability to daisy chain middleware via app.use and the ability to daisy chain additional endpoints by using get and post and things like that, as well as the ability to start a server by listening on a port. So the simplest possible server setup is the following. Hey app, listen on a port. Port 3000 is a common development port number, and that's all there is to it. This is a server we have now up and running. We can actually test this by going to our command line and running node on server.js like that. Okay? So the command line is just blinking here because we have started the server and it doesn't go to the next prompt log because it's currently running our server. Now we have no positive output that's actually running other than it's just this blinking line here. So we can give ourselves a message that says the server is actually running by giving a callback function to app.listen. So we can have this callback that says, hey, I want to run something, such as a console log message, when the server runs. So let's give ourselves a string inside of this console log that tells ourselves that the server running on port 3000. That way we have this positive message coming out to us. So if we save the file and go look at our command line, we don't see anything. That is because it's currently running the server on the previously saved file. Just because we save changes to our server.js file does not mean the server is going to automatically detect those changes and restart itself. Instead, we are staring at a previous iteration of our server that every newbie will learn to hate. This is what happens. You have to sit here and stop and then rerun your server every single time you make changes to it. And you're like, Luke, that sounds like a nightmare, and you're probably going to forget it somewhere in this tutorial, so what are we going to do about it? Well, there's a varying number of tools that help us restart a server, including one called NodeMon, or NodeDemon, or Nodemon. It doesn't matter how you pronounce it. If you go look at the FAQ of this library on npmjs.org or their GitHub repository, Nodemon, Nodmon, even they say you can pronounce it however you want. It doesn't matter. So if I want automatic server restarting capability, we need to install a new package in order to do so. We're going to install it and save it actually as a development dependency by passing in this $D flag to our npm install command. This is an organizational tool or trick that you can use for larger scale projects. Also, quick pause. Sorry if you see me messing with my nose or face a lot. If you can hear, I'm a little bit stuffed up and I have allergies going on, so this constant messing with my nose to make sure it's not running like crazy or prevent myself from sneezing is something you're going to be hearing a lot in the video, which I do apologize for. So I just want to go ahead and put that out of the way that I'm not under the weather, but I am stuffed up, so that's why you see me messing with my nose a lot in the video. Anyway, like I was saying, this development dependency organizational trick is something that's nice to have on larger scale projects, but it's not important. It simply has two different objects in your package JSON where you can organize what things are required for the production version and what things are required only in development. And Nodemon can be one of those things that's only required in development, or Nodemon, or whatever you want to call it. So once we install this, let's go check out our package JSON to see what I mean by that organizational trick. In our package JSON, we now see dependencies, things required to run the project in general, and things required that when we're running in a development environment is required, aka Nodemon, which we're going to be using here. So first thing you might be thinking is, well, okay, now I go run Nodemon on my server.js file, and we get this error that says Nodemon is not recognized as an internal or external command. This is because Nodemon is not installed as a global dependency like Node is on our machines. It is not set up to be globally usable, and I wouldn't recommend it either. What we're going to be using it instead is as a locally installed dependency. Where did it get installed to? Into Node modules. Things installed into Node modules can be referenced from the package JSON script itself. This is where we're going to add our two scripts. I want to go ahead and do some cleaning up, some copy and paste right here. We're going to have one called start. That's going to be our traditional Node on server.js, like that. Then we're going to have one here for Nodemon on server.js. This will allow us to start it within a dev script to make sure it has auto restarts when files change. This is our production ready start script if that's what we're ever going to get to. But nevertheless, our dev script is going to be the magic sauce here. So let's check it out. If I go over here and I now run npm run dev, that's where that script comes from. We now get the Nodemon output, and it puts out server running on port 3000. So look what happens if I add a bunch of exclamation points and I let the file save. And I go look at my output now, we can see that Nodemon has detected file change or save changes and restarts the project. Okay, so some other things to consider is generally you do the following. This is not going to be any kind of requirement for this project, but in case you ever see something like this is called a JavaScript short circuit. It will attempt to go down the line, and if process environment variable port has an undefined value, well, undefined is considered falsy. And if it's falsy, it will then go across the OR to the next step and go, okay, well, that's falsy, so let's go try and find the next value that's truthy. The number 3000 is considered truthy, which means truthy checks out and it will use 3000. If the port is defined, and let's say we're given port 5040 or something like that, well, 5040 is a truthy value, which means it skips the short circuit and doesn't attempt to check anything else and will use port 5040. This is the bare minimum amount of code you would need in order to deploy this project out somewhere, meaning this would be a port assigned to you for my app at herokuapp.com or something like that, or in local development, it'll default to 3000. If that's the case, let's replace the 3000 with the variable. Let's replace this one with a variable, and that's not going to work. We have to concatenate it. Here, let's check this out. Let's switch this to a template literal, and we're going to go ahead and switch the strings to backticks and string interpolate instead of concatenate the port into that value. So that on its own, we can see every time I have autosave on, so every time I've been autosaving this project, we can see Nodemon triggering the restart here. But there it is. There it goes from the port version to the interpolated 3000, which means we are successfully doing this JavaScript short circuit on this environment variable that we haven't defined and probably won't, but I wanted to point out this is something you'll commonly see, and that's why. So Now that we have the Express app made and we're listening on a port here, let's get underway to actually code out our middlewares and our endpoints. So as of right now, if I went to the browser and if I went to localhost 3000, I hit enter, we see that we get this lovely response here that says cannot get /. It is an HTML page with a pre-element added to it that gives us this little response that says cannot get /. This is a Express opinion. So the library Express. I don't mean that like in the adjective Express opinion or something like that. This is a response from the Express library that's coded into it that if it cannot find a API method for the get request to the /. Now, when you hit enter into a URL bar, that defaults to a get request to a server. We have a server, and as you notice here, our server has nothing that says, hey, here's what to do when get / is incoming, right? There's no logic we've written for that, so it tells us it can't find anything on that /, aka this can be considered a 404 error request, right? Or error response, meaning, hey, I can't find that path. So what we could do here is add something as simple as the following. Let's take a look at how we would add this response, how we can add this request as an API route and send a response to it. So we're going to say, hey app, you're going to have a get method coded onto you that will look for a / request. And this is called sometimes the action of the endpoint, right? So this action is the function that runs when this request is made. You have access to 3 parameters in any action: rec, aka request, res, aka response, and next, aka the next function. We'll talk about the next function when it comes to middlewares here in a moment. But commonly, you'll do request and response. One request comes in, one response goes out, and the server is done. That is how it works. That is the order of operations. So what is this going to do? Let's have it send a message. So we're going to say, hey, response, send something. Now, you have a lot of options here. So response has a lot of things it can do. It can offer redirects. It can send JSON or JavaScript object notation data. It can send simple strings. It can send entire whole web pages if you wanted it to. It can send files, right? So you have tons of options. For now, let's just stick to a string. The server says, hello there. That's all it's going to do. So let's go see if this made a change. Remember, I saved the file, nodemon restarted. If I refresh this, we now get a server-side response. So imagine instead of localhost 3000, we type into a URL bars mycoolwebsite.com, or like, if that was your web address, for example, your domain that you purchased, then that's what it would display. But we know that's normally not the case. What it normally does is it sends a website over as a request to the root path, aka the /, aka mycoolwebsite.com, or in this case, localhost 3000. So instead of typically sending something on the root response, we're going to do the following. This is a middleware that is built into Express. Middlewares, as their name implies, typically happen somewhere in the middle of the request-response process. A request comes in, and it can filter through middlewares. Middlewares, for example, that says, hey, I can parse some information on you. Hey, I can add some information to the request so you can do something cool. Hey, I can check for your authorization status. Are you logged in? If so, continue to the next, that function I talked about, next step. If you're not logged in, send a response that says, hey, you got to be logged in to view this page, and redirect them to the login page. A middleware that can log where the request is going. They can be like, papers, please, where are you going? You going to this page? Go ahead. Let me write down where you're going so I can see that, right? So that's what middlewares are for. They can be written at the application level, or they can be written at the route level, meaning middlewares can also exist at the route level between a method and path. And before the action is ran, aka this function, we can go through a series of middlewares if they need to be that specific. There's a lot of cool tricks that you can do in terms of daisy chaining them in different locations, right? So we're going to, and the clear designation of a middleware will be this keyword called use, app.use. That means we're going to be using some kind of middleware. Middlewares are functions. Now, because they're functions that run on our HTTP web server via Express, they have access to the request object. Maybe they need to check something on it. Is rec.user.loggedin true? Is rec.payload containing our certain properties? Rec.body, does it exist? Does it not? We can check properties on the request or modify, add things to it. We can do whatever we want to it. It's just an object at the end of the day. We have access to our response, meaning if this middleware is an authorization or login middleware, it may need to send a response before it gets to an endpoint. So if something going through a middleware says, hey, you're not logged in, I have to send a response saying so before it gets down here. Let's say they can't say server says hello there unless somebody is logged in. This should send a response. It might look something like this. res.status can set a status code. This is not to be confused with send status, which sends a status code and not text. This sets a status of, say, 401, which stands for unauthorized, and then we can also send a message that says, you gotta be logged in, ya jabroni, like that. So that way we give ourselves a message in this middleware, and this might be written inside of an if statement that checks something on the request, for example. So we have a lot of cool choices. We have access to request, response, and like I had said, next. So let's say if, like, I know there's not a variable called logged in, so bear with me. Let's pretend there is a property on the request called logged in. I'm making this up. This ain't a thing. You would have to add it yourself somewhere in another middleware, for example. If the request logged in is not true, we would then stop this function in its tracks. And like I said, set a status code of 401, send you not logged in. Look at this brilliant, look at this lovely text typing right there. That's an error message we have for ourselves, right? So otherwise, how does it continue to the next step? If they are logged in, we have to tell it to continue along somehow to get to this endpoint. Because remember, the request comes in, it filters through any middlewares. If they get terminated early, they're done. They stop here and the whole process is over. But what happens if they're logged in and they're allowed to continue? How do we tell the request to move along to the next step, which might be this endpoint? That is the next function's purpose. We can tell it to go to the next step. Think of this as a checkpoint, a rule at a restaurant when you read on the door, no shirt, no shoes, no service, right? So that's something like this middleware is. If we pass this checkpoint, we can say, come on in. And that's what this next function does for us here. So this is what a middleware might look like. Now let's actually write a middleware that could serve some kind of purpose to us. Like I said, whatever happens, we have to let it go to the next step. But what if I wanted to console.log something? For example, where is this request going? Well, we can write rec.url, or there's a property called request.originalURL that will log where this request is being made to. So whatever our users are clicking on our website, whether they are button clicks or typing into a URL bar or copying and pasting URLs from like a bookmark bar or something like that, it will log where this request is going, and we can see if like bots are hammering our server or something like that, or we can see what pages are most popular and log where people are going on our website so that we can know, hey, we might need to change our layout because people are not going to our register page or something like that. And without the next keyword, the whole process stops. So again, NodeMon's been restarting everything. We're on our home page here. We click on refresh, and it looks like nothing happened. But if we go back to our command line, we can see that someone has visited the home page. If I went back to my website now and I typed in /hello, we don't have that endpoint, so we get a 404, cannot get /hello. But if I go back to my command line, we see that someone made a request to hello. So now we have a way of logging where these things are going. Look what happens when I comment out this next keyword, this next function call, save the file, NodeMon restarts, I refresh the page. I can't zoom in on it, but I have a loading spinner that is stuck. That is because it logged the request. There's the log to hello. But because I never released it to the next step, or I never sent a response, it is just stuck in limbo until it times out. I think it's like 10-ish seconds before it times out, and we'll get a cannot connect to the server error appearing in the browser here after some time. But that's what happens without that next keyword. It just sits there forever, and it gets stuck. That's why it's important to know the next function and how to use it. So Now that we have that middleware, I was saying that this endpoint of / isn't a very good idea, as typically a response of this endpoint is sending the website. Now, we could do something like a res.send file, but there's actually a middleware meant to send what we call as developers static files. These static files, once I've written them, they're not changing, right? Meaning I will send a copy of these 3 files to anyone that wants, any browser or user that requests my website. So these are typically called static files and can be served via a specific middleware built into the Express library called Express, which is what we imported up here, .static, like that. Static is a function we're going to be calling, and we're going to pass it a path to find our website. Now, generally, you should do like a path.join, __ dir name, blah, 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 but there are some shorthands we can get away with. For example, if I put a string value in here that doesn't reference any kind of relative pathing whatsoever, we're not going to say up 1 out of server. If I simply write the keyword public, which is the name of the folder we have available for our website, with no relative pathing, it will look in the root of the project for a folder by that name. If I do not specify a file inside of a folder, it will default to an index file found in that folder. So this Express static middleware right here with the keyword public, again, if you were doing anything more complex, you really should do a path.join, but we're going to keep it kind of simple in this case and utilize this shorthand technique and confuse people in the future of what we got away with if they don't know these tricks either. So, which is honestly the mark of poorly written code, where we know what it means but other people don't. So say what you will about the patterns I choose here, but nevertheless, I feel cool writing it this way. So this references the public folder, which means now look what happens. If I refresh here, there's still no is hello. But if I get rid of hello and go back to localhost :3000, there's our hello world, there's our console log, and our CSS is all back in action. So we now have a middleware that is meant to log where requests are going, and we can even see there's where the requests were. There was the hello 404. There's the root path, which is the home page. The home page gets sent with the index HTML, but it also makes a request for the style and app.js files. And voila, we got it all working with this static middleware now. So we're making some cool progress here. Now, like I'd said, this project's purpose is going to be having 2 endpoints, an app.get and an app.post. The get is for retrieving the information of a character that we are progressing on our simple little web app here. The post is to be adding what class we're going to be choosing in our level up process. Okay? So, for our get request, and I realize that to test the post, I'll have to teach y'all at least a tool. Is there a Postman browser API dog? Is that what's popular these days? No, that looks like it's downloadable. I want a browser-based alternative. I should have done this off camera. So I'll have to teach y'all possibly an API testing tool, which you mean, considering this is a server video, that makes sense. Because to test the post request, we'd have to go and write some JavaScript code or some HTML markup in order to test this one. So we'll get there eventually. But for now, let's go ahead and add a path here of, let's say, post level up. So this would be a post request to http :// local 3000 / level up in order to make this request. Okay, it's going to have an action rec res, and let's just have it send a response that says level up. That's all it's going to say. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing for the get request. I'm going to add a similar looking comment. Again, I recommend my newbies do this so they know what these things mean or where they go to. This is going to be a get request to the path of website / character. And like its name implies, it should get the character's information. So let's go ahead and write character as the path. Rec res is our action, and our action is going to be send the character info. Let's just send character info quite literally as the string response right here via the response send. And that's it. We're just going to send character info. So we can test this. Node mons restarted everything, homepage, refresh, nothing changes. If I go to /hello, that is still a 404 error as I never added it, but if I go to /character, we get the response of character info now. Congratulations, we now have API endpoints ready to start building out our website. So sending the string character info, it doesn't really help us here. So what we need to do is we need to start figuring out how we want to set up our utilities and our code in order to send some information to a website that we can then use somehow, right? So what do I imagine seeing? I imagine seeing something akin to the following. How about an object? This object, so I'm mocking what I think our data structure should be. We can make this up. You can make it more complex than my video goes into. And by all means, share what y'all got in the comments below. I love seeing what people come up with, right? That's how we learn together. I teach y'all the fundamentals. Y'all go and code something crazy. You bring it back to me. I take a look at it. And I love learning from y'all as much as you can learn from me, right? Because again, we're all on a journey together here, right? Of developers teaching and helping each other and learning from each other and uplifting each other. That's the whole purpose here. So I'm making up this data structure. So how about we do something like, what did I decide was okay? Because I did some testing beforehand for what I liked. So we're going to have something that tracks the total levels. This will be something like this, right? Something that just tracks the total levels of our character, probably initially at 0 until they pick their first class. This will be a property we also use in our server to make sure someone can't level beyond 12, aka the end of Baldur's Gate 3, unless you mod higher levels. So we're also going to have a collection of classes that the player has chosen. How about we do an array of objects that tell us, for example, what levels they pick certain classes, right? So multi-classing monk is a terrible idea in general, but or we could do monk rogue is actually not that bad. Although you need multiple levels of monk and multiple levels of rogue for it to come to fruition. In BG3, you can get rogue thief level 3 to get the fast hands double bonus action, which can make monks terrifying, especially open hand monks. Anyway, we're not going to get into that level of detail in this app. This is meant to be more simple. I think this is pretty good. This will be a quick test to make sure we're not exceeding a certain level. This will catalog what levels they have chosen, what classes, and will also give us some nice information to display on our website. So basically, this thing will be growing in character levels up to 12 as they choose them out from our website. So that's going to be our chosen structure. As a matter of fact, check this out. I should move this scope-wise above my app.get, and let's just send the character info now instead of that string, so we can actually send this character info, right? So back to /character, and wouldn't you know it, I have an extension on my Chrome browser. I'm not sure if this is done by default these days, but this is what it might look like to you in your browser. If that's the case and you don't have these raw parse buttons, go to the Chrome or Firefox extension site or store, whatever you want to call it, and look for something called JSON, JSON formatter. This will give you a tool in your browser to nicely display JSON data in the browser instead of this flat string. Because remember, JSON, or JavaScript Object Notation, is a big fat flat string, and that's all this is. So keep that in mind. All right, so we have the data structure decided. That's what's going to be sent from our request to the character. Now, like I said, I'm making the decision in this tutorial not to just stick with an in-memory data structure, meaning I could very easily simply come down here, increase total levels by 1, which would be what? To do that, we would do character info total levels plus equals 1, character info dot classes dot push whatever our current level is, so it would be level total levels, whatever our current total levels is, and the class they have chosen, for example, barbarian rogue monk. It's actually a viable build, unfortunately, in Baldur's Gate 3. I don't think it's very good in tabletop, though. But yeah, all we have to do is push that into the array and update the character level, and theoretically, we have now successfully updated the info. We send a response that says level up, and our code can handle displaying the new information on the screen. That's a completed API right there, technically, but like I said, we're not going to be doing it via an in-memory data structure, because once I save this server.js file, and I remove these, those levels are gone forever. I can add them via the website, but the second I restart my server, we lose everything we do in memory. So we're going to choose to do this from file system instead. So here's how we're going to rock it. We can do it in the following ways. Let's go ahead and go back to where it was like this. Let's check this out. So what I'm going to do is I am going to make a characters JSON in my data folder. Character, not characters, JSON. I'm going to paste that character info structure into my JSON folder. And I'm going to convert all these into JSON, which is all properties must be wrapped in double quotes. All strings must be in double quotes. Okay, so with a little bit of magic, we convert this whole thing into a valid JSON structure. Numbers are fine as is. There's our lovely JSON structure if this person has actually chosen some levels, for example. There we go. So let's read this data and send it as a response of our endpoint. So instead of our character info up here, I'm going to go ahead and remove these bits of code that are relevant to that now. Right? What we're going to do is write some code to access that part of the file system. So we're going to be importing two things to do so. The path module, which is built into Node, and the file system module, which is built into Node. They're like a PB&J style combo. If you have one, you typically have the other. Now, path you could use on its own for a varying number of purposes. File system, aka reading and writing to files, you're probably going to have path not far behind. So path you can have uses on its own. FS, you're probably going to have path teamed up with it. So here's what we're going to do, is we're going to make a variable called data path. How to find the character JSON file. It's going to be a path.join to underscore dir name. Underscore dir name is how our computers can have this project scale on our hard drives, because your hard drive structure and where you put this project is probably not going to match where mine is. But if we want and when everything server side is done via absolute paths, meaning my hard drive, my Covalence folder, my helping students folder, my Express character level up folder, my server folder, my data folder, and how I find the character JSON file. But underscore dir name, we can even log it, is built into Node as a property that spits out what path is it to where we reference dir name. In my case, it is my hard drive's setup to the server folder where the server.js file is logging dir name. So it's the entire path up to where we currently are. So look what happens if I do a combination join of dir name and a relative path string. So I can say relative to server.js, look in our current directory of server, look for a folder called data, and inside of that, look for a file called character.json. So now if I console log data path, look what our console log spits out. It spits out the correct path to that character JSON. And because I did this with a path.join underscore dir name, this will look unique to you on your computer. It will be the path to the file based on your hard drive setup. So that's the important thing to keep in mind on this path.join. It lets us write scalable code between your machine and my machine, as well as wherever we deploy this code to. So that's going to be our data path. So inside of our app.get, we are now going to use file system to read the contents of that file. We are not going to be using the synchronous method because synchronous is blocking code versus asynchronous code, which is what a read file is. Meaning, imagine we're at a fast casual dining establishment together, like a fast casual restaurant. By fast casual, I mean nicer than fast food, but not quite like a sit-down restaurant. This could be something like where an artisanal burger shop, right? So you and I enter this shop together. You are in line in front of me. I'm in line behind you. You go up to the register and place your order. And let's say they say, okay, sir, that'll take about 10 minutes to cook the burger the way you want it. You will then stand there for the full 10 minutes. get your food, get out of the way, and then I go up to the register and place my order and wait the time for my order to complete. Now, we know that's not how it's done, but that is what we would call synchronous or blocking code. If it takes 10 minutes to make your burger, do you really want to be blocking the entire line from placing their orders while we wait the 10 minutes for your burger? No. That is why we're not going to be using synchronous code. We're going to be doing asynchronous code. So that way, when you place the order for your burger that may take up to 10 minutes, you are given a buzzer or a callback function, and you step out of the way, then I can walk up and place my order, and we repeat the process for each customer. Then, as the customer's burger is ready, your buzzer or callback function goes off. You walk back up and collect your burger, or they come find you based on a flag system or something like that, or they call your receipt number. And that is how it's handled, and that is asynchronous or non-blocking code. I want to make sure if one person is requesting their character info and it takes a while, I don't want one person's request blocking another person's request. So we're going to keep this whole thing asynchronous. So read file has 2 arguments at minimum. Where's the path of the file we're reading? It's our data path variable. And this is our buzzer, aka our callback function. This will have two parameters, the data from the file and an error if one occurs. Okay, so we need to error handle properly here. So if an error happens, we need to stop this function dead in its tracks. I also want to set a status code of 500 saying, oops, something went wrong on my server. So a 404 means the path went wrong, 500 means something went wrong in my server side code. And we're going to do a message. Now, I'm going to switch from doing the keyword send, and I'm going to switch to the keyword JSON. Send is dynamic. It can send JSON, it can send numbers, it can send strings, it can send HTML. JSON just is a specific kind of send just for JSON data. I might send a message that is the error message, whatever that, or error message, not error, there we go. And maybe an error that says, oops, my code sucks. Now, this is a humorous error message that I might send on my personal projects. You should probably choose something a bit more professional looking in an actual portfolio project, but I like to have some fun, some self-deprecating humor as well whenever these things happen. So there we go. What if I typo this, for example, right? So we're going to cause an error here in just a moment for this if handler, but let's say it successfully works. I'm just going to move my res.send right below that if statement after this read file asynchronously finishes, because we're in the callback of the read file now. So let's see what happens when we send the file. Switch to a smiley face if it works. Otherwise, it should send this error message, but we have a typo in the file path name. So there we go. Error, oops, my code sucks, status code 500. Message, and no such file or folder or directory or whatever, right? So let's switch it back to character JSON. Let's see what happens. No error, smiley face. But let's not send just a smiley face. Let's send the data it read from the file, right? So res.send data. Now, notice here that Chrome automatically downloaded a character file. That is because it sent what it read, which was data from a file, and that's what it tried to send. I don't know if I can even open this. Hold on. Quick edit there. Just had to check what it downloaded in my downloads folder, and it indeed just sent a file that you can't open because it has no extension. So this doesn't help us. So you're thinking, okay, well, there's JSON data inside of that read file, so let's switch it to a response JSON instead to see what it does. And we see here that it returns something called a buffer. A buffer is Node's way of telling you that it read something on your hard drive, but you have yet to process it. Our hard drives on our computers probably are not written in JavaScript. So how do we take something on our hard drive? Let's just say it's binary data, a bunch of zeros and ones that represents this information in our character JSON file. How do we take that and convert it to something usable and sendable via JavaScript? We need to somehow parse that information. That can be done with a utility from JSON itself. So we can say character data equals json.parse of the raw data, and now we send the character data as JSON instead. So check it out. We have now done a parse step in between these, and we go from looking at a buffer saying, I got it, but you haven't dealt with it somehow, to our information once again. And now this is being read from the file and not from a variable simply made in my code, which means every time I restart my server, I am not losing the contents of the character JSON. There we go. So we now see some basic error handling and how to write this file system stuff here. And we also would want to write a file like write system over here and whatnot, but how about we learn something a bit cooler? This file system deals with callbacks, which is how you would handle asynchronous code back in the day. But in the modern era, we have a concept called promises that allow us to more cleanly use this code inside of our endpoints. So let's see what we can do with that. I am going to choose to say, let's move this somewhere else, because the more we add here, the nastier it's going to get. So how about we go back to that character service file I had talked about and begin adding some stuff here. So in my server.js, I'm going to cut path and fs and move it here into my character service. Now, why did I swap their position? I don't know. I put the shorter one up top because I think it looks better. So there's our fs and path requirements for this character service file. I'm going to grab this data path and move it into the character service file. Now, character service is in the same directory as server.js inside of my server folder, so the relative path is not going to change. I'm going to also take this fs read file and cut it and paste it into character service, because we're going to be using it here in just a moment. So obviously we do not have access to response and request and things like that, and we're going to be keeping this here, so let's comment it out for now, and let's go ahead and add a new function that we are going to be calling read data. It will take no parameters, and its purpose is to be executing this read file while converting it to a promise. We can do so by writing return new JavaScript promise. The promise takes this callback function that will have access to the resolver and rejector functions. We commonly shorthand them to resolve and reject. We are going to do the following. Let's comment this back in and move it in. I'm going to move read file into the code block of the promise. So we have access to data path. It's in scope of that function. We have this if error, right? Instead of having this networking response, we're not in a networking layer. This is called our data layer. This is called our networking layer. And typically, you do not mix the two together. Hence, why there's going to be no response happening here. What I will say is let's reject with the error should it occur. And there you go. Next, let's try and parse that data and send it. So I'm going to switch this to a keyword called parsed instead of character data. That makes sense. Take the data and parse it. Now, what happens if the data inside of our character JSON file is not valid JSON data? Like, what if there's a typo in here or something goes wrong during our development process? Well, it would behoove us to take this JSON parse and wrap it in a try-catch block. That way, if a error happens while parsing it, so we can call this parse error, if that happens, we should also reject with that parse error, and that will be a more specific error than the one from the read file. The read file will tell us if there's an error read in the file. The parse error will tell us that it failed to parse the JSON data because it's not JSON data. You'll commonly see unknown symbol or fail to parse JSON, and now you'll have a more specific error handle for catching that specific case. But there we go. All we've done, and instead of res JSON, we're going to switch to resolve. And that's it. We have now successfully converted our callback into a promise, which means we have a cool new way we can run read data. So watch this. I'm now going to simply choose to export this file out. We'll say module.exports equals object. This object will have the read data property like that, and the read data property will be a method read data. This is a ES6 shorthand, where if the key of an object is the same as its value. The right hand read data refers to my function I call read data. The left hand of the colon is the key or property of an object. If they are the same variable name, we can choose to shorthand it as following. This allows me to go back to my server now and import my new service to use. So I can say const character service equals require what I've now written in my character service file in this current directory. From there, I can now head into my get character, and here's what we're going to do. Now, we can write it as the following: character service dot read data. Then we now have access to the then syntax because it's returning a promise. That should have my character data, which we can then send as the JSON response. If an error happens, we can catch it, set a status code of 500, and do what we did before, which would be error. Oops, my code sucks. Message e.message. There we go. So there is our far cleaner and better looking endpoint now. We have taken the business logic of the read file and abstracted it to over here, right? Our character service file. This is a very common separation of concern you will see on a lot of projects. And this is our baby steps towards that, right? We have moved business logic or data layer logic away from the networking layer logic, and it gives us cleaner to look code here. But you might be wondering, hey Luke, what if I want to do async await because I like that syntax better? There are some drawbacks to Express in that it has built-in error handling for old callback style code, I'm pretty sure, but what it doesn't have is asynchronous promise error handling, which means we have to go back to writing all the error handling ourselves anyway. What do I mean by that? Well, first, I realized I didn't actually test this. So let's go take a look, refresh, no difference here. But we have great looking code here. How do I switch this to async await style syntax? We need to add async to this keyword, the keyword async in front of our action function. We're going to move this into a try catch block. I'm going to cut this, emit shortcut my try catch block, and paste this code. So instead of .then character data, we're going to do the following. Character data, const character data, will come from a call that we will await from character service read data. We are then going to send the character data as a response. Instead of catch E, we're going to take and delete the catch part and move the response down there into the catch block itself and switch this to error instead of e.message. Fix our parenthesis that I messed up there, format, and there we go. That's what your code might look like with async await, but again, we have to set up our own error handling in every single endpoint with async await because it's not equipped to handle this style of syntax to my knowledge, right? That's one of the drawbacks of this, writing it ourselves. But there you go. That's what it's going to look like. So let's go see if that actually displays correctly. And it does. Very good, very good. So I did say that I was going to try and have this in 2 videos, where video 1 covers all server-side stuff and video 2 will cover all client-side stuff, but I think now this is going to be a 3-part series, where this part is basically the intent of the project and the very basics of where we're heading towards with our server. The next video in this series will be finishing out the character service file to write data and also check the data existence and integrity, meaning the only way this currently works is if we create the character JSON file and populate it beforehand. But we know that's not going to be a great idea for our projects. We should have this probably default somehow in case it doesn't exist, right? Then from there, I'll have the right data, and then we'll actually, yeah, you know what? I want to show y'all how to use a server-side testing tool, and I will decide on which one I want to use off screen. I have Postman installed down here, but I'm going to see if I can find a browser-based alternative that doesn't require installing another application for the series, so we can learn how to test these routes in a testing tool. And then the final video will actually be connecting it all to the front end finally. So I hope you appreciate the work we have done so far. There will be a branch on this repository, which you can find in the description down below, that will say end of video 1. So when you find this branch, like let's go to Covalence. I don't know if I can find one really quick here. Oh, there's tons. We have tons of them, don't we? This is from Matt Morgan's previous video on using GPT to do things, so you should check it out. He has really cool videos that he uploads to our channel as well. He was one of the last videos he put up. But this drop down right here, he only has a main branch. That's how you're going to find the various branches that have the various parts of my videos coded onto them in this repository, which I have yet to create. So I'm going to create this and push to it. Description down below. If you're interested in any of our courses or getting involved in our community, description down below will have a link to our community membership. Otherwise, do all the YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe. If you go ahead and finish it out yourself, share your repositories with me. I'd love to take a look at them and goof with them. And if I get even a couple of responses that have their own versions, I would love to clone them and make a follow-up video of what y'all have made. So hopefully y'all have found this interesting so far. By the time I finish the other two videos, I might not have gotten any comments yet, but if you have comments that want me to explain things further, code things further, leave them, and we can continue this series together as kind of like an ad hoc mini course here on YouTube. But I'll see you all in the next video where we begin coding out the rest of our server and how we can test it.